Thank you, Lucas. Thank you for inviting me here, whoever it is that invited me. Thank you for being here. I wasn't sure if somebody would show up because where I come from, it's summer holidays, but apparently they haven't started here yet. So yeah, I'm going to speak about 40 minutes on this topic of the protein transition. I was already introduced, so I don't need to repeat this, but let me just say a few more words about ProVeg, which is an international organization with the mission to reduce the consumption and the production of animal products by 50% by the year 2040. And our headquarters actually in Germany, in Berlin. If you're interested, check us out at proveg.com. If you're ever interested in jobs, we also have jobs in Germany and in many, sorry, I keep clicking the wrong side of the button. We also have jobs and offices in many other countries. And very briefly, we focus on all stakeholders in this story of plant-based transition, from the consumer up to the UN level, with all kinds of different interventions. And one other thing about me is that me and my girlfriend live in Belgium, and we have, my girlfriend runs a sanctuary for farmed animals, rescued farmed animals, and we also have a bed and breakfast where people can stay between the animals and the trees, basically. So, I think it's safe to say that if you look at society, we're engaged in some sort of big structural food fight. A food fight over what is the right food, what is good food, what is fair food, what is healthy food, etc. It's very easy to make ChatGPT come up with 100 food-related problems. It does that in 10 seconds. But I do think that if you look at all food-related problems, the biggest ones are concerned about or are around animal products. And it is the shift from animal products to plant-based products that is, on the one hand, the most efficient on many levels, and I will talk about that, and which is also the most controversial and problematic and difficult. All right, so let's examine this. I'll start by telling you about some inconvenient truths. And you may be familiar with some of this if you've read about this, but let's see where it gets us. So I'm taking still pictures from an advertisement by a company that produces meat alternatives. I'm not showing the video because that's too complicated, but just a couple of still pictures. The commercial is about a guy, let's call him David, and David is a big manly guy. And those are the most difficult to convince in terms of eating less meat, as you may know. And he's got a very manly job. He's a truck driver, and he's listening to a news flash on the radio that says that meat eating has negative impacts on the environment. And can you guess what he's doing here when he hears that news?
Switching the channel.
Yes, exactly. He switches the channel. He doesn't want to hear that. Right? Why would he want to hear some bad news about something that he loves? Right? So he doesn't want to hear. So let's see what he doesn't want to know exactly, what these inconvenient truths are. So they are all surrounding, again, these category of animal products. And there's 3 fields where these products are problematic, and the first one is environment. And it's interesting that for every major environmental problem, the UN, the FAO, has identified animal products as the first, the second, or the third most important cause. So for every major environmental problem, and you see them here, meat production or animal products production is implicated, right? And it's such a huge part of these problems that it is at the same time very strange how underlighted it is, how much we are looking away from it, how we try not to look at it. Like for instance, if you look at greenhouse gas emissions, maybe you know that animal production is responsible for 14.5% of the worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. Do you know how much we spend on that in terms of like the money, the climate money that we have that is spent on reducing animal production? That's less than 1%. So there's a very big unbalance between the size of this problem and the resources that we put into it, at least here concerning greenhouse gas emissions. Or another way to put this, this is from one report, is that in terms of bang for your buck, in terms of return for investment, this is the best thing we can do. Focusing on the plant-based transition is the best thing we can do in terms of return for investment. It's better than investing in replacing cement or looking at the iron and steel industry. So these things, the plant-based proteins, if we tackle that, we can gain major profit for the environment and for climate change. So where does this potential for climate change exactly come from, and where do these greenhouse gas emissions come from? Well, for one thing, it's from deforestation, from land use changes. I think you know that. If we change the use of land from forest to pasture, then we are putting a lot of CO2 in the air. We're creating a lot of extra problems. And we do these land use changes from pasture to from forest to pasture. We do this either, to put animals there, or to cultivate or to raise food for the animals that we're going to eat, right? And this is a statistic that never ceases to amaze me, but if you look at the world and you look at the surface area that we use for the production of animal products, then that is a surface that equals the size or the surfaces of the continents of South America and Africa together. So that is the surface that we use for animal production in the world. I think that's just astounding and incredible. One consequence of that is, of course, biodiversity loss. And I think you may have seen these statistics, right? Of all the animals in the world, 36% are humans and 60% are livestock, and only 4% of the mammals are wild. Bit similar with the birds, 70% of birds in the world are poultry, and only 30% are flying around, right? I'd like to address some questions that I think are, or some answers that I think are not good answers. So one of those is the shift away from red meat to white meat. Have you come across that idea? I think as people interested in environmental topics, you might have. So the idea here is let's eat less red meat and let's eat more white meat. So red meat is mainly beef, but it's also pig and even horse and mutton. And white meat is mainly chickens and fish. And why would this shift be good? It would be good because indeed the white meat causes a lot less CO2 emissions. It's mainly the ruminants, the cows, that produce a lot of CO2. So this idea of shifting away from red to white is something that I can see in a lot of places. Like here, a menu somewhere in a restaurant, I only found chicken on the menu and vegetarian dishes, but there was no beef. So what do you think? Is that a good idea? It is to a certain extent for the environment. But the thing that I want to emphasize here today is that we look at this whole protein shift holistically. And we don't just look at the environment, but we also look at these other arguments, health and especially animal welfare. And the problem, if you look at this last factor of animal welfare, the problem is this. You understand? So this is the meat produced per animal, per individual animal. And it's very simple, but a bigger animal produces more meat. And a cow is bigger than a pig or a fish. So what does this shift from red meat to white meat mean? That we need many, many more animals, right? So for instance, if you look at the amount of meat that we can take from one cow, that is 250 times as big as the amount of meat from one chicken. So we need 250 chickens for every cow that we replace. So if you also care about animal welfare, this is a very bad idea, right? And I think it's tragic and it's perverse that some people are putting this up as a solution to climate change. Why? Because we have caused climate change to a large extent. And so, is it moral to now sacrifice even more animals to help solve this problem that we created? Is it moral, especially when there's other alternatives than these chickens, when we can shift to plant-based instead of to chickens? Another example here is these people who are trying to promote insects as food. Insects are even smaller. You need 10,000s of them to replace one cow, right? Again, people are using new species, creating new species, making them suffer. If they can suffer, we're not sure in the case of insects, to address a problem that we created. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's a moral solution. And another answer that I think is not the best answer, and this may be more controversial among environmentally inclined people, which I belong to, should we focus on local foods? And I think you've seen that solution as well, right? It's all over. Let's eat local. And I think that eating local is an interesting idea in several respects, but we should not think that we're going to solve climate change with that intervention. Why not? Because if you look at the life cycle analysis of products, of food products, and you look at where in the stage of the life cycle of a product the CO2 emissions mainly come from, it's not from transportation. So there on top you see the legend, right? Here's transport. So here's beef. Can you see where transport occurs in that first line? It's right there. That's the amount of greenhouse gas emissions caused by the transportation of that product. The rest is other things, right? It's the farm and its land use changes. So whenever somebody says, like, let's address climate change by eating locally, I would say that you can encourage that, but you should not, or people should not take it as the first and the only intervention. And why do they do that? Why is it so popular? I think because it's not so controversial, right? Who are you hurting when you tell people to eat locally? Not the local farmers, they love it. The politicians will be happy to spread that message because they have the local farmers on their side. The consumers can still more or less eat everything. So it's not controversial. It's at least it's a much easier message than the message to shift from meat to plants, right? All right. Second topic is health, very briefly. So animal products consumption or an overconsumption of them is related to the main diseases in Western societies, diseases of affluence like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, overweight, etc. The strongest evidence we have for the link between processed and red meat and several forms of cancer. We shouldn't exaggerate these effects. It's not like some people, some vegans would say that meat is as dangerous as tobacco. That is not true. But overconsumption definitely is a problem in Western countries. And I think that is going to lead to a situation where we, at some point, will no longer be able to afford all the health costs, especially if we have graying populations, aging populations in our countries, in Western Europe and other countries. It will be difficult to keep paying for all those interventions to heal people. And we will have to put more emphasis on prevention. And prevention, part of that is healthier eating. There's antibiotics. You know that animals in farms, in intensive farming, get a lot of antibiotics because they have lives or they live in circumstances in which they can easily get sick. So preemptively, they'd be giving antibiotics, and this can create antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And we could end up in a situation where the most commonly used antibiotics are not effective for us anymore. So that would be a dramatic situation. And thirdly, a more recent issue is pandemics. And if we want to reduce the risk of future pandemics, we also have to look at intensive factory farming. Why? Why is that a risk factor? Because on the one hand, these big sheds with 10,000 or more chickens, they're very fertile breeding grounds for creating new viruses or strains and viruses and bacteria. And secondly, by encroaching upon more and more land that we grab for resource use for animal production in the tropics or Amazon forest or whatever, we get in touch with more and more potentially harmful organisms, which may intrude in our society or civilization. So have to look at this factory farming system also if we want to reduce the risk of pandemics. And thirdly, the third big argument to reduce our consumption of animal products is, of course, animals. And I want to spend some time on animals, especially because this is the most ignored and neglected issue of all. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there's how many? 17 here. But animals are not mentioned in there. I mean, they're mentioned here, life below water, but that's not from the viewpoint of individual creatures, right? This is, let's keep the oceans healthy, let's keep the fish in the ocean so we can keep getting them out of there, right? That's basically it. But animals as individuals, as part of nature, but with individual interests, are not mentioned, right? And that, I think, is very striking, and it shows that our thinking about the environment, I would call it quite anthropocentric. It doesn't start from the concerns of individuals in those ecosystems. And that is the main difference between environmental ethics and animal rights ethics, if you're familiar with that. There is, and this comes from animal rights people, there is a initiative to include the 18th Sustainable Development Goal, zero animal exploitation. I think it's quite ambitious, this one. I'm not sure if it's realistic, but it would fill a gap. Let me give you just an idea of what's going on in terms of numbers, right? So this is the amount, this graphic is from Our World in Data. This is the amount of animals that we kill every day worldwide for food, every day. So you have to imagine 900,000 cows every day, 200 million chickens every day, today, tomorrow, day after, every day of the year. Those amounts they're actually unimaginable for us. So let me put it in a bit more concrete terms. If you would be a normal meat eater and you get to be, let's say, 82 years old and then you die, and you would have eaten meat normally your whole life, then you would have eaten, this is old research that we did in Belgium, but probably still pretty similar, you would have eaten 1,800 entire animals. 1,800 whole animals, which would be 44 or 42 pigs, for instance, 43 turkeys, 900 chickens. You can see them all together. So each of us would eat a number of petting zoos all by ourselves, right? So these are the numbers, and the numbers, of course, in themselves don't say anything, but the problem is, of course, that these are millions of animals who have suboptimal lives, to say it charitably. Let me go over some of the practices very briefly. I'm not going to show very graphic images, but I just want to show that the issue with what we do with animals in factory farms is very structural. It's not a matter of exceptions, like when an animal rights group will distribute undercover footage of what goes on at slaughterhouses, etc. People will say like, oh, this is, first of all, this is in America, or this is an exception, and these people should be punished just as some bad apples. And I don't even want to talk about that. I don't even want to talk about those infringements on animal welfare. I want to talk about the structural issues. So the structural issues, for instance, are things that we do to animals' bodies, manipulation. So what we do, and this is very cruel and perverse if you think about it, we adapt their bodies to our systems, right? So we're not going to adapt our systems to them. We have a system that is efficient for us, and we're going to adapt their bodies. So for instance, because the animals are so close to each other, thousands and thousands of them, they're going to start pecking each other, and that's why we're going to cut off their beaks. right? Or we're going to cut off tails of pigs so that they don't bite each other in the tail. And some people would say, oh, this is for the animals themselves, this is for their protection. But of course, that wouldn't be a problem in such a horribly unnatural system, right? Housing is another very fundamental structural problem. So this is, for instance, a pig in a farrowing crate. So this female pig, the sow, spends most of her life in this situation. So she can turn around here, and this is, again, supposedly for the protection of the piglets so that she doesn't squash them, right? There is another fundamental issue with what we call dropout. Dropout are the animals that do not arrive at slaughter age, right? They drop out because they have other problems. And this dropout rate can be quite high, at least in absolute terms. For instance, if you look at chickens, the number of chickens that won't make it to the slaughter day is about 2 to 3%. But if you calculate that, so there's about 70 billion chickens every year slaughtered in the entire world. 2% is really a lot of chickens, right? And what happens to them is that, for instance, they get crippled and they can no longer reach the water or the food, right? My girlfriend in our sanctuary in Belgium, she gets chickens every week from a guy who works at an intensive factory farm. He's responsible for killing these chickens. And he's soft-hearted, so he can't kill them. And so he brings them to my girlfriend. So my girlfriend has to heal them every week. She gets chickens that are really in bad shape, and she tries to heal them and then adopt them out. And yeah, I think it's a bad system in which we rely on very few compassionate individuals to do all the work without subsidies, just putting their time to clean up the mess of other people. There's also emotional issues involved in this whole system. Can you see what's abnormal about this picture? I mean, we don't see this in the normal system. We never see chicks and chickens together. A chick gets out of an egg and there's nobody there. There's no mother there. They never know their mother. And this is probably the first time you think about that. But could this mean something for all these millions and billions of creatures, that they never know anybody that's family, that can guide them, that can support them? Would this have psychological repercussions about their mental welfare? And most people would even say mental welfare of a chicken, what are you talking about, right? But that's exactly the thing. We have to look at the individual well-being of these creatures, both in our systems and in the wild and in nature, and realize that that's what matters. I mean, individual well-being, in the end, is what matters. It's why we do everything, right? So there's also transportation issues, and then there's slaughter, and slaughter also here, a couple of percentages of these chickens are not stunned when they're slaughtered. So they would be slaughtered alive. They're not properly stunned. So coming back to this structuralness of the problem, this is, in a very simple graphic, the issue. So we have, we want very cheap animal foods, very cheap meat, and that means that the lives of the animals have to be as short as possible. Because every day it lasts longer, that life lasts longer, it will cost more in terms of feed, heating, ventilation, and whatever. So the shorter we can make the life, the better. So the faster we can grow the chicken or the animal, the better. And so we have succeeded, unfortunately, in creating Frankenstein-like chickens that grow very big, very fast. Do you know how old a chicken is when you have it on your plate? Anybody?
17 days.
That's a bit, that's pessimistic. But it's quite short. It's 42 days, more or less. Yeah, 42 days, and the life expectancy could be 10 years. So what we have on our plate is actually a very young individual that has a completely adult body. It's a bit comparable to a boy of 8 years old that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, basically, right? And this fast growth, of course, is implicated in a lot of issues. For instance, they're bred to be hungry continuously. They can eat and eat and eat and eat all the time, which means that they have big muscles, which means that their organs are sometimes underdeveloped because there's no room in them, which means that sometimes and often actually they just can't, their own legs cannot support them because they're way too big. So we also have a couple of turkeys. We always have a couple, and we know that at some point we have to euthanize them because at some point they can no longer walk. After they are rescued from the farm, they still keep growing, and at some point they're too heavy for their own legs to carry them. So this is all quite depressing, but still I would call this whole animal production issue, I would call it a wonderful problem. Why is it wonderful? Because if we tackle this, we can tackle all these related issues. So there's a huge opportunity here to do good. And that's why I and the other people at Provech have devoted our lives to this issue, because it can have such a big impact. I don't know any issue that has such a wide impact on so many different levels and areas. Now, how is it looking? You may think that everybody's going vegan today, and there's vegan options everywhere, and it's actually getting a bit annoying. But if you look at the statistics, well, this has been the consumption of animal products from 60 up till a couple of years ago, 2020, 2022. If we would see a business as usual scenario, then we're looking at this. We're looking at demand that will still grow, because especially it will grow in the developing countries. And if you look at the market share of plant-based products, of meat alternatives, the market share is about this big. This big. So there's a humongous amount of work to do in this space that's so important. So let's go back to David and let's psychoanalyze what he's doing here. So he's changing the channel, as we've seen. He doesn't want to hear it. Why does he not want to hear it? He is a stakeholder in the story. He has an involvement. And you could write it like this: he's a stakeholder in the story, right? And everybody who eats animal products is a stakeholder. Everybody who eats animals has a certain interest in arriving at a certain conclusion, namely the conclusion that it's okay what I'm doing, right? So we call this, as you may know, cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the annoying feeling when there's a difference between our behavior and our beliefs, right? So, for instance, I believe that animals have the right to live, but I'm eating meat. I've lived like that for 10 years or something, with that annoying dissonance in my head. And so there's 3 ways to reduce that dissonance. We want to reduce it because, again, it's annoying. The first one is to close our eyes, to pretend it's not there. And society helps us with that, because the slaughterhouses are... Have you ever seen a slaughterhouse? Most people have not, right? Or the fact that in the shops you don't see any heads of animals. You know, like they're packaged and they're cut, and you don't recognize the animal anymore. So society helps us to close our eyes. The second one is to adapt our behaviors to our beliefs. So we believe that animals have rights, or the planet is worth saving, whatever. So we're going to adapt our behavior to that. We're going to eat less meat. We're going to do whatever, right? And the third one is what most people do: adapt our beliefs to our behavior. So we want to keep the behavior, we want to keep eating meat, we want to keep doing something that's bad for us, that's unhealthy, that's unfair, whatever. And so we're going to invent explanations for that. Sounds familiar? We all do it. I mean, I do it too, right? Not in the case of food or meat, but in other cases I do the same thing. One thing I find really hard to do without is a wood fire at home. And I know that's really bad. But I invent excuses to keep doing it, right? So we all do that. So, and we would say in the case of meat, it's natural, it's normal, the animal doesn't feel that, it's fake news, it's bullshit, whatever. All kinds of things that allow us to keep on going. So the question is, if that's our psychology, what do we do? And we go back to this commercial, and our guy David, he comes home, and his wife, it's a bit of a traditional situation, his wife has cooked, she has cooked his meat substitute, and he tastes it, and he says, this is pretty good, right? And now his wife, apparently he's emancipated enough to do the dishes, his wife has put a cookbook and the packaging of that meat substitute near the dishes, and he picks it up, and he's interested. And you can imagine that next time he hears this news flash on the radio, maybe he doesn't change the channel anymore, right? What's happened? He's had a good experience. He's had a good taste experience, and he knows that maybe now there's not so much to defend against anymore. He can be more open to hearing that message because he has an alternative, right? And again, look at yourself, even if you're vegan yourself, look at yourself where you are doing this or demonstrating this behavior. Everybody of us does it, unless you're a saint, maybe. So, what I've been doing in the first part here is giving you information, arguments to change behavior. Do those arguments help? Will you go vegan after this talk? And maybe that's one person, but in general, it does work like that, right? I'm not going to be disappointed. I'm under no illusions that I can have that effect. But we have to look at this in two ways, or from two directions. So if you look at how change happens, yes, to some extent it happens like this. So if I give you information, you might change your attitude about the environment, about animals, about whatever, and from there you change your behavior, you eat differently. It does happen, sometimes. But in addition to that, we also have to look at this. Change someone's behavior for whatever reason, to whatever degree, so that from there, they can more easily change their attitude. Can you imagine how that works? So it's exactly like in the example in the commercial. Suppose I would put you on a vegan cruise, and there's nothing else to eat than vegan food on that cruise, and you have no interest in it, no moral or ideological interest, but you eat the vegan food and you like it for an entire week. Can you imagine that while you're doing that, and after you're doing that, you will be more open to hear a story like this, at least that the experience was good, right? So that is the idea of the behavior precedes the attitude change. The behavior change precedes the attitude change. And what we need for that is not this. So we have still a situation where the alternatives are, well, there's more and more of them, and there's better and better, but they're still too expensive, and they're still not good enough, and they're still not everywhere, and they're still not default, so you still have to go out of your way to not participate in the standard behavior. It takes a lot of effort. You have to be motivated. I made this change to plant-based 25 years ago. I was very motivated. I would do it if I could only eat bread and water, then drink water. But for most people, you can't expect that. For most people, you can't expect the same motivation. So what we have to do is make it easier, right? Alternatives have to be easier, have to be available everywhere, and the effort goes down. And you may wish for people to be able to muster all the effort, and you can stand on your head all day, but it's not going to happen, unfortunately. Not as long as it's easy enough. This is basically just a matter of degree. So what we need to do is create food environments that are conducive to change, right? And we are starting to work on that. It starts with producers, of course, producers of all these different plant-based or meat alternatives, plant-based, cultivated or fermented, and different technologies like 3D printing. And we may actually reach a situation where technological changes are the main driver for this transformation, right? Just like in the past, for people who care about animals, You may wish that we don't hunt whales for oil or energy, we don't use pigeons for the mail, etc. These things have disappeared, but it's not because people start to care about pigeons or whales. It's mainly because we had alternatives. For instance, in 1986 we abolished whale hunting, and until the end of the 19th century, whales were hunted for whale oil, and people used that as an energy source. But then other energy sources came along, and we stopped whale hunting because it was no more interesting for that purpose. But you can imagine that if we had been still hunting whales all over the world in 1986, we wouldn't have abolished whaling, right? Unfortunately, it may sound pessimistic, but we have to see the combination of people's care and their attitudes and their wanting to change. We have to see that in combination with how difficult it is. So I wouldn't call it pessimistic. We have to be realistic and pragmatic about that. The creation of a conducive or facilitating food environment also comes from the caterers and the people offering the food. This is, I think in Vienna it was, Burger King that said, do you want a normal burger or one with meat? Very important, right? To change this perception of what is normal, what is the default. Also in terms of pricing, right? A veggie dog cheaper than a hot dog. Or here, Lidl, the supermarket, wanting, this is about retail, wanting to reduce its meat offerings, which is revolutionary. I mean, a supermarket will be glad when it's selling more plant-based products, and that doesn't come at the cost of the meat sales. But it's this that has to happen, right? I mean, no matter how many plant-based sales are happening in a supermarket, if the meat sales don't go down, we haven't won for the environment or for the animals or whatever. So this is what we need. This is also an interesting. Okay. So let's see where we're going. You know the gluten-free thing, right? Gluten is the new Al-Qaeda. I mean, this is from some time ago, but gluten-free has become a really big thing. And you know how many people actually cannot take any gluten whatsoever? It's 1%. So this 1% of people were responsible for all this? No. It was the 10% people that I would call the gluten avoiders, the gluten reducers. They think it has some benefit for them, and they avoid gluten even though they have no medical condition. But these 10% of people created an interesting market, an interesting demand, and then it became interesting for producers to cater to them. And it's the same thing in the plant-based sphere, right? We have a small number of vegetarians and vegans, but a much bigger number of reducers. And it's for these reducers that the market caters, that the producers cater. You can see this very easily. So the number of vegans in the world is 1%. You know how high the percentage of the market share of plant-based milk is worldwide? Liquid milk, plant-based, is 14%. So it's not just the vegans that drink all this milk, right? They would have to be drinking milk all the time to be responsible for that demand. It's the people who, for whatever reason, to whatever degree, because they're allergic or because they want something different, are also consuming plant-based milks. So this is very important for the demand and for driving the change. This gradual change. That's why I'm not like trying to convince you to be vegan, but I mean, you can, and I would love it. But if you participate in this change by pressing on demand, by partially eating differently, that is already contributing to change as well. So let me finish by this, and this is unfortunate, but because this thing has been getting more and more popular, it's also been getting more and more pushback. And I think you have seen it here in Germany as well. So for instance, what might happen is that David, the 5th time he gets served this, he's read something by now in the newspaper and he says, this is processed food. This is ultra processed, I don't want it. There's some truth to that processed food is not as healthy as natural products. But this is also a narrative that's driven by the meat industry. So we have to be very careful by just adopting that narrative uncritically. It's a new narrative. It's a narrative created because the meat industry feels threatened. And there's other new narratives. They're saying that it's bad for the economy, so this is a time of crisis. Are we going to do all kinds of regulations now at this time, and you're going to ruin our pig farmers, etc. It's bad for the global south. That's kind of also an argument that they're using. And also very much an issue today is that this whole thing is becoming or has become politically polarized. Have you noticed how vegan and meat reduction has become something for the left, for the progressives, has become part of the woke umbrella for the conservative people? Just like environmental change, climate change, all these topics have been associated with progressives. And the people on the right are not interested and are actually fighting it. A very deplorable situation that will seriously slow change, I think. We see this structurally, lobbying. There's a lot of lobbying going on against plant-based lobbying that translates into, for instance, government's dietary guidelines, the dietary guidelines of your country that recommend to eat a certain way. They are heavily lobbied and influenced by the powers that be. There's the idea of the fact that you could not or you cannot name a veggie burger a burger. You know that idea, right? So fortunately, they didn't succeed with their attempt to forbid that or to ban that, but they did succeed with milk. You can no longer call, since a couple of years already, you cannot call, well you can, but a producer cannot call soy milk milk. They have to call it soy drink or something. So this is an active sabotaging by the animal industry. There was also, for instance, a plan to reconsider all the animal welfare law in the EU that was also boycotted and sabotaged by the industry. This is a number that shows in Europe shows the difference in subsidies for plant-based alternatives versus animal products. It's 1,200 times. And finally, this is a question that is raised sometimes. There's a lot of people who, and especially farmers, they would say oh, in the media it's always about meat. Meat is being demonized, and meat is guilty of everything, and meat is considered as the main culprit of climate change, etc. Well, if you look at the numbers, we see that this is actually not true. This is research from, this is in the English-speaking world, but people looked at 10,000 articles about climate change. And I've mentioned in the beginning that animal products are responsible for 14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions. Do you know in how many cases of those 10,000 articles animal production is mentioned as one of the causes of climate change? It's in less than 0.5%. So you cannot say that we're demonizing meat. On the contrary, this topic is being silenced. We're not looking at it, right? And I think that we do need governments to step in. And we need them because we are constantly bombarded by all kinds of messages from the industry. We have to fight our own biology to go against this urge to eat fatty and sugary food. So it's hard to do this alone. As a consumer, it's hard to say, I'm going to eat differently. So we absolutely need governments to help us there. And the problem is, of course, that this is considered still a topic that governments should not get into. They should not meddle with what is on our plates. I think they should meddle with what's on our plates because it's so hard to control. They can do this in different ways. They can subsidize, they can tax, they can do all kinds of things. This is the amount of investments that's been done in the last 5 years in plant-based alternatives, government investments. This is this big, 1 billion. If you look at what one country spent on the energy transition, the United States, in just 1 year, the Biden administration promised to an energy transition, 350 billion. So just compare those numbers, right? So this means that I think if we can ever convince governments to take the protein transition as serious as the energy transition, that would be a complete game changer. But we're still doing this, or we're still seeing this kind of stuff. Become a beefitarian, this is from a couple of years ago. Enjoy, it's from Europe. So subsidized by European taxpayers' money. Right? So this is very, very strange and very contradictory. Right? On the one hand, Europe will tell us like we have to eat less meat. On the other hand, they will subsidize meat marketing messages. We with Provich have talked about this very strange position in Brussels. Finally, the last stakeholder in this story, NGOs, citizens, and you. After hearing this, you can just continue as before, or I don't know what you did before, but continue to keep eating meat. But you can also choose to change your consumption. And again, that is an important individual step that we all can take. And I'm not saying like go vegan tomorrow. I mean, again, you're welcome. But it's important to not see this as a black and white thing. It's not yes or no. It's not all or nothing. If you contribute by doing it partially, you are, I think, part of the solution. The more you can do, the better. But don't let anybody tell you that if you don't do everything, you're not doing anything. Right? That's always the problem that we have. It's like, I mean, you let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And many people don't start doing anything because they can't do everything. Don't let that hamper you. Don't let that stop you. Secondly, and more importantly than your own change, I think, is your advocacy. The way you speak out about these topics. Here in this school, for instance, you can adopt a campaign called Plant-Based Universities. This is a campaign that's being waged in several countries, and there's several universities that already have pledged to go entirely plant-based. So that on the campus cafeterias, only plant-based food is offered for the environment's sake. For the maybe somewhat older people in the audience, your money is also a way to make an impact. And I always emphasize that in Belgium, but in Germany it's probably about the same thing. If you have a median income in my country, median means half of the people earns more, half of the people earns less than you, then you are about 21 times as rich as the global average. The average, right? You're probably 500 times as rich as the poorest. And you're in the top 4% of the global population. So most people in Western countries, and not by far not saying all of you, but most people have the opportunity to do good with their resources. But the most important thing, and this is done for the younger people, the most important thing that you can do on this topic and on any other topic that's socially relevant is your career choices, right? This is your life in months. So there you die at 90. I am over the hill. I am 50. I'm here. Some of you are here. And so the question is, with this big space that you have, this maybe 40 professional active years that you have ahead of you, what are you going to do? How are you going to fill that in? And most people, unfortunately, still fill it in with finding solutions for problems that don't exist, or developing or marketing, inventing some 100th iteration of a problem that we've already solved a long time ago. Like how many of these things do we still need, right? And people spend their brain space on that. Like we have a world that has so many problems, in which so many beings are suffering, and we're still doing these jobs that don't contribute anything. It's hard for me to understand it. I'm sure you don't belong to that group being here, but you can spread the message. Or if you have kids, tell them to study something useful, something to contribute with. Of course, that's the drama. It's so much easier to find a job doing something useless than to find a job and to get an income from something meaningful. Right? That's very unfortunate, but sometimes you have to create your own opportunities. Anyway, thank you for being here. I hope you fill that in, the time that you have, with something very useful. I hope this was food for thought, and I welcome your questions. Thank you very much.